Commissioner Chappelle is excused. Commissioner Jay is excused. Commissioner Carpenter. Commissioner Cohen. Commissioner Oliveros. Commissioner Proskovich. Commissioner Source. And Alex, I'd like to remind you that you have to push the button on the microphone.
There we go. Now it's green. There we go. All right. If everyone had a chance to read the minutes, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I have a couple of
Yep. Please.
Sorry, Karen, I have a couple of edits. Commissioner Source's name is spelled wrong in a couple of places. Bottom of page 4 of
Yep.
10. Two paragraphs at the bottom.
I can correct all of those as Scrivener errors.
And the other thing too is we had someone provide testimony, and her first name is Alexis, and the last name is different in 2 different places, one on the bottom of page 4 and then one on the bottom of page 5.
Thank you, I will correct that.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else?
I motion to approve meeting minutes from the July 10th meeting.
Second. Did you get the second, Karen?
And the second was Commissioner Source?
Yeah. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nothing. All right. So that's that. I don't think we have any visitor or public comments. So I'm going to probably kick it to you, Fred, for the staff report for what we're talking about tonight for new business.
Is this thing on?
If the green light that needs to be on, probably.
It's actually a red light. So we have a different system over here, and I actually have a priority button so I can shut down Kenna if she gets out of line.
Noted.
All right. She noted that at the last council meeting, so I thought it would be appropriate for me to note it here. So what this, you folks have the authority to interpret the code for us. And so I would like you folks to make a code interpretation for us. Do we allow shipping containers in residential areas is really the question. And it seems to me that it's really like an accessory sort of use. I mean, if it's going in as like a full-blown house and it goes through a permitting process, I can almost see that, okay, you go through the permitting process. I still don't think that you're going to be able to meet our siding standards because we don't allow sheet metal siding in most shipping containers or sheet metal siding. But the issue that I'm really asking about now isn't an accessory structure. Like, could somebody pull in a shipping container, drop it on their property, say it's an accessory building? Now, what I did was in your staff, in the staff report for this, I noted the accessory use section of the code. It's in subchapter 17, subchapter 17. Can you pull that up for me, Karen? Just subchapter 17, just so we can see where it's at. There's a table. You'll remember there's a table and there's a couple of footnotes. And one of the footnotes for the table says customary accessory uses include customary resident or accessory uses allowed in residential zones include customary accessory residential accessory buildings and structures for private use such as pergola, greenhouse, hobby shop, patio, porch deck, woodshed, shelter for domestic pets of the resident, fence, and fallout shelter. I would argue that it's not one of those things. Also, it says private garage, parking area for one commercial vehicle having a gross vehicle weight less than 20,000 pounds, all that sort of stuff. And so what I essentially went through in this is I tried to make the argument that I don't believe that it's a customary accessory structure. Also, I don't think it's a vehicle, because when you're detached from a vehicle, it's no longer a vehicle. It's like it's a structure, just like a mobile home or a manufactured home. Once sited on a site, you would need to get a permit for that building. Essentially, it's essentially it's a siting permit, to site the building. So based on that, I don't think it's a customary accessory building. I don't think that it's a vehicle either. And so my read of this is it's probably not a customary accessory use. It's probably not something that we allow unless it's attached to a building, and then unless it's attached to a vehicle, in which case it would be subject to that 20,000 pound standard. Yes, sir.
So is this only applying to like permanent shipping containers? So like the pods shipping containers that people use for moving, would this ruling apply to those as well? Or is this only for permanent structures?
Well, feels like that's a different issue. A lot of times we see the pods, I don't know, that's a good question.
Because I've seen people with the pods who've had them for weeks, if not months at a time.
And that's really what I worry about, is I take the position that there is no temporary land use.
Okay.
And part of the reason for that is I've seen things permitted temporarily and then last forever. And so having someone take one of these and say along one of these and putting them on their property, like the likelihood that it stays forever, I would say is fairly high.
Okay.
And so the pods is a different thing, and we were actually trying to address the pods specifically in a parking code that we had put before the council a while ago. That parking code specifically, one of the things that it said was you could get for lack of a better word, an approval to put a pod on a public street for a limited amount of time, and just really tried to make it clear. Another thing, like a lot of times you'll see people with the dumpsters and whatnot and put them on their property for a limited time. I feel like we could probably address that some other way, but I definitely don't think that I don't know if it's the best way to address it is through this list at the bottom of this table. It's kind of my read. And I also don't think that it's included right now in the list on the table.
I think I have a pedantic question maybe about this, of how do you denote a shed versus a shipping container? Like, what's the break? Is it just metal? Is it construction? Is it appearance? Is it an accessory?
Well, a shed, if it's put on a lot, if it's less than 200 square feet.
So it's just the square footage is the trigger.
If it's less than 200 square feet, you don't need a permit to do it. So you could put it on a lot. If it's less than 200 square feet, a lot of times we don't even see it. Sometimes people will call and say, my neighbor put a shed on his property line and now it's causing my water to drain on my property. And it's like, okay, well, now we sort of got an issue and we kind of address it that way. But a lot of times, like if we see a tough shed going in, we don't address it at all. This is kind of different because it would definitely be over 200 square feet. And any shed over 200 square feet, like somebody building a garage, like a 20 by 20 garage, that's 400 square feet, probably more. We would make them go through a permit process. Some of the things that we would look for is, does it meet our 40% lot coverage requirement? And if it doesn't, then we tell folks, oh, you're exceeding your lot coverage requirement. You can't do that. We also require a building permit. And so it's looked at for things like structural, and it goes through the whole process. And that's sort of the thing, is a shipping container, especially the one that we see out there, is larger than 200 square feet.
So is there already a backstop in the code then that exists because it's over a square footage? piece
I
that
mean-
would trigger, but because it's a standalone metal box that didn't have it require construction, just dropping it on there. Is that basically, I mean,
I mean, yeah, so how Jeff has told me is shipping, a shipping container put for a limited amount of time, 180 days, doesn't require a building permit. But there's no guarantee that it's temporary. I mean, and it's one of those things where, you know, like any number of folks could put it on their lot and say essentially, oh, I can't afford to move it now. You know, and then all of a sudden we've got a situation where it's there for a long time. Not to mention, I mean, we wouldn't allow a metal sided, I mean, we don't allow metal sided accessory buildings. So allowing a metal sided shipping container is probably not something that we would allow permanently. And again, I don't believe that there is such a thing as a temporary land use, so.
well, I'm inclined to agree with you, and it was sort of already, oh, sorry, missed a question.
Oh, it's all right. I do have a question. So in the city of Salem, these shipping containers are often used for emergency preparedness silos. Usually they're on like church properties, et cetera, et cetera. But I could see a theoretical scenario where like a neighborhood gets together and says, we're gonna buy blankets and all these other supplies and put it on someone's side property that has a lot of property, like, you know, so are there situations where maybe there is like a community benefit where there's like an acceptable use in some scenarios, or is this just like or are we just saying maybe that's just like you can have something like that, but it needs to be part of like a church or part of a community, like commercial property
And
kind
I
of
would
deal?
say that we would allow that there. We do, like, I mean, there's a shipping container at the library, or there was for quite a while. And that was for sort of moving stuff in and out of the library when like the carpet got redone. We do allow shipping containers in industrial zones, commercial zones, all that sort of stuff. It's specifically, and probably public service zones, though I don't know that for certain, just because I didn't look at public service zones.
So we're just talking specifically in a residential zone?
Right.
Absolutely not.
Right, and it's specifically associated with an accessory use for a single family home. You know, it's a, I don't know, how, do you have that subchapter 17 up, Karen, or do you have it available? Just so we can take a look at it. Yeah, because it says accessory uses allowed in residential zones. So as, oh yeah, but it'd be good to look at subchapter 17 if Karen can get to it. So where does, oh yeah, scroll down just a little bit. Yeah, accessory uses and structures. So you'll just see right there at the bottom of that. That's how it gets to it. And so you have to have a primary use that's allowed in the residential zone to be able to get an accessory structure. That's how that works.
My only other comment was gonna be that, the gross vehicle weight less than 20,000 pounds shipping container is not gonna be.
Yeah, I
Okay,
know that.
okay, just
I
making
know
sure.
that.
All right, just
Yeah,
making
there's
sure
no
that's
doubt
not
about it.
perfect. That's,
I looked into that after.
yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that that's,
Yeah.
not a loophole. that
Yeah.
can be exploited.
That's exactly right.
Well,
That's
do you need,
exactly right.
yeah,
Cool, okay, well, that sounds good.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess, do we need a motion to,
Is that official?
or do we need something more official? I'd see. Yeah, so we,
Yeah, I think that's good.
okay. Karen, do you have some preferred language, or should we just gonna wing it?
Just probably to affirm.
Yeah, I mean, you can use this first one here. I move to, yeah, affirm that storage containers are a customary resident, or, whoops.
Oh,
Wait, there it is.
There we go.
are not an allowed accessory use on residential on residential property unless connected to a vehicle and having a gross vehicle weight less than 20,000 pounds. Which, again, is probably not gonna happen.
I'll look for somebody to make that motion.
I can make it if you need to. So I move to say that storage containers are not an allowable accessory use on residential property unless connected to a vehicle and having a gross vehicle weight less than 20,000 pounds.
I second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Motion carries. Thanks, Fred.
Yeah, no problem, thank you.
Let's see. Other discussion items?
Yeah, so I'll just, I was sort of thinking about, I did get this handy little thing from some folks at the state about all the land use changes that have happened. And so it seems like we have some work that we're gonna need to do with our code. And I mean, we just have a lot of projects going on, and so I guess it's just a good time to sort of remember those. And like, if you have any questions about any of them, you folks are gonna have your fingers in a lot of different projects coming up. So I mean, we did get a grant to do a housing production strategy, so that's good news. We wanted to get a grant to do an infill code to help us look at our infill, which we did not get, which was a bummer, but we did get a housing production strategy grant. We also have the Central Talmadge project, which has kicked off, which is looking around the Central Plaza area, around the Catholic Church area, around the Central High School and Talmadge Middle School area, kind of trying to say, we've got a trolley here now. We've got a whole bunch of pedestrian traffic. We've got a fair amount of vacant land. How can we develop this in the best way going into the future? So that's going to be that project, and that's going to be something that you hear a fair amount about going forward. We're actually going to have an open house out at the gate on October 17th about that. So feel free to come to that if you'd like. We're also doing our downtown parking experience, our downtown parking study right now, which is another just really interesting project, and we've got a really good team on that project. So all of those projects you're going to see at a certain point. We also have a rezone that will be before you next week. We had sort of talked about it next month. Looking at that little piece at 3rd and G and potentially rezoning that. So that's going to be before you next time. And then looking at this document, it seems to me that we have a whole bunch of various things that we need to do. I had sort of mentioned middle density land divisions at a certain point. The idea of that is now that we allow middle housing, we have to allow people not only to be able to build a duplex, but potentially to divide the property in half for that duplex. And so we probably need to have some criteria associated with that. As we do that, I'm going to have some policy questions for you folks about, should this only apply to duplexes? Or since we allow some uses like fourplexes and other zones, potentially we want to expand those provisions to apply to those zones as well. Also, I'm going to throw out, potentially we want to allow folks to divide off accessory dwelling units as well. But that's going to be a policy question for you folks to consider. So that will be in your future. Also,
Just to clarify, these are legislatively driven.
these are all, so the middle density land division is a legislative change, and since it's a legislative change, I guess my question is, do we want to tweak, do we want it just to apply what's required under the legislative requirements, which would only be duplexes, or do we potentially want to expand this to reflect some of the other uses that we allow in some of our zones? So anyways, that's going to be a question for you folks. Also, looking at this housing omnibus bill, we have to, it's really big. It looks like we're going to need to allow single residential occupancies in any place that we allow a single family home. Single residential occupancy is potentially 4 rooms rented individually with a common kitchen or whatever. They used to be far more regular. Looking at it and just looking at what it says, it doesn't mention anything about parking requirements. It says 4 in a single family dwelling. Does that mean then that you set your parking requirements at that for a single family dwelling, or can we establish a certain amount of parking spaces needed for these? I think that's going to be part of the question going forward. Also, another thing that we have to allow, and I just really don't get this one, we have to allow housing units on the ground floor of commercial buildings if they're priced to 60% of the area median income. So it like supersedes how our commercial zoning works. So we'll have to tweak that at a certain point, because I'm sure somebody might look at that at a certain point. I think that there's actually more, but those were the things that really jumped out. The single residential occupancy thing is a weird thing, but so anyways, that's going to be coming before you folks here in a while. Also, I mean, just some of the things that I wanted to do as part of the infill code is like height in residential areas. The 35 average is still probably too high. 35-foot average is probably still too high, and so that we'll try and figure out how to make what we wanted to do with that infill code. We'll see if we can do an iteration of it. So anyways, I think that's pretty much it with stuff that's going to be coming before you. I think that all of it kind of sounds exciting. What do you folks think?
Please. Hey Fred, do you have an update for us on how many folks have filled out the parking survey and what your goal is?
Well, we have, I don't know exactly how many, it's like 160. Our goal was higher than that, of course. But I mean, we've done a lot of things to try and boost that number, and it's not gonna.
Like a jazzy video starring.
We did a video. We canvassed the movies a couple of nights. We had a table at the Music in the Park. I've gone directly to the apartments and left little flyers there for people to fill them out. I've put little flyers in the downtown businesses. We've done targeted social media. I don't know. At a certain point, it's one of those things where it's like, dang, you try, and at a certain point, you gotta like respect people's prerogative not to participate. I think. I don't know. If you have any other ideas, though, we're definitely willing to consider them.
So I guess follow up to that, if that's okay. So how long do we keep it open if numbers aren't really going up before we start like looking at the data and kind of seeing what they're saying?
Yeah, our consultant for the project has been looking at the data even with
Okay.
it open. I think they're wanting to take it down here in a little bit. I don't know exactly when they're planning on doing that, but they are looking at it. I mean, it's good information.
Okay, thank you.
And I mean, it wasn't a small survey. Like, I mean, when you folks originally saw it, it was pared down to what it is. I mean, it's a beefy survey. So,
Going back to the legislative
yeah.
code fixes, is there a timeline for that those have to be done by?
Yeah, some of them. The single residential occupancies by January 1st, 2024. So that's right quick. There's something about condominiums that I couldn't see it in the bill itself. And so that's something also by January 1st, 2024.
And I'm assuming they're providing funding to backfill planning activities, right? As we do this. Oh, wait, not, okay.
I mean, it would be great if we would have gotten the residential infill thing to help us think about some of that stuff. But, you know, the housing production strategy is something that they have funded. So we're thankful for that. I mean, the housing needs analysis was a regulatory requirement, and they provided funds to help us do the first one. And now and the housing production strategy is also a regulatory requirement. I mean, I will say that the state does now have a hammer. If you are underperforming, it says it expands the conditions under which LCDC may pursue an enforcement order and the types of actions that LCDC may compel a city to do. And that could include a housing accelerator program that we have to go through if we're not meeting our housing production goals. So it's interesting.
I'll join Fred's commentary for just a moment. So Representative Evans did a good job fighting for us to get funding, for everyone to get funding for our production and strategies. But Chair, the others are unfunded mandates. And that those come out of most of the others, I won't say all. But we did have really good on our representative side fighting to get that funding for us for the larger projects, housing needs and housing production.
So anyways, that's sort of the update. It will be, it will be good. It'll be good. And I mean, there's
Keep
good,
saying
where
that.
we have
It'll be
good
good.
projects, right? There's fun projects going on. You know, like, I mean, some of these projects, like, I mean, the downtown parking study, it's given us a chance to talk about our downtown, right? And the role that things like parking play in the experience of downtown for people. It's helping us get in front of an issue that we know is going on. And also, like, the central Talmadge area, we're like, right now, there's a lot of stuff going on out there, and there's a lot of possibility for other stuff to be going on. And this gives us the opportunity to get in and say, hey, you know what, this is what we would like to see there, you know, and really shape a community in a proactive way, shape the community in a proactive way. So we have really good projects going on, I would say, too, so. Perfect. Well, I do got a video for you. And so I'll give you the option. I know that. So honestly, I spent a good portion of the weekend trying to find good videos for you guys, and I was kind of struggling. I will say that I'll give you the option. You can watch a Strong Towns video. Similar to the one that we had seen before. I think we got a couple of new commissioners, but the one that we saw before was just sort of a description of what some of the work that Strong Towns was doing. This one's actually from Strong Towns. They have a new production guy, and he's putting out some very nice videos. The other one, yeah, let's do the Not Just Bikes one. I know that Alex doesn't like Not Just Bikes entirely, but this is a good description of. What's that?
I said I feel called out.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So we'll watch the Not Just Bikes one because it's a good description of urban design and some of the things that, because I mean, seriously. All right, I'm gonna go off real quick. A lot of times when we're talking about zoning, or we're talking about vehicular trips, or we're talking about green space or whatever, or we're talking about roads.
If you live in Oregon,
Whoa.
you can look stuff.
I'm trying to figure out which one it is, sorry.
Oh, yeah. A lot of times, there's such abstract concepts that we can't envision. We're trying to create a unique place and a unique community, right? And fundamentally, that's what we're trying to do, right? And these are just sort of tools. And so anyways, I think that this description here is just a good reminder, like fundamentally, we're trying to create great places, right? I don't know. We can talk about it more when it's done. Yep.
Don't suck.
Have you ever walked through a great city and thought, wow, I love this place? Places that are unique and interesting. Places where you feel like grabbing a drink and sitting down to enjoy yourself. Places you purposefully go to on vacation. Places that are memorable. And of course, there are urban places that are miserable. Places you go to only if you have to. Places you leave as soon as you can. Places that are forgettable. What is it that makes some places great and others, well, not? One key factor is what urban planners call a sense of place. When you get it right, you know it. And when you get it wrong, you end up feeling like you're in no place at all. When you're somewhere with a strong sense of place, it feels unique. The Great Market Square in Bruges doesn't look like Santorini's Ia Street, which doesn't look like Rocio Square in Lisbon. That makes it hard to generalize about great places, but still, there are a few characteristics that most of these places share that can give us an idea of how to build better urban places. The first is a sense of enclosure. Some planners think of spaces like city squares and streets as public rooms, and to make a room, you need walls. There are no hard and fast rules for enclosure for streets, but one rule of thumb that's often mentioned in urban planning documents is to have no more than a 3-to-1 ratio of street width to building height, or the other way around, and no more than 6-to-1 for public square. And for what it's worth, many of the best examples of great streets do have this kind of ratio, and many of the best examples of terrible streets don't. That being said, there are examples where this doesn't fit at all. St. Peter's Square in the Vatican definitely has a great sense of place, but it's also very wide with about a 12-to-1 ratio of width to height. Though it does have an obelisk to break it up in the middle. Of course, these extreme cases only work when they don't have cars in them. This would entirely lose its sense of place with Toronto's Highway 401 running through, which would actually fit, though you'd have to bulldoze the facility. Regardless, feeling like you're in a specific public room helps define an area's sense of place and makes it distinct from other places nearby. If you're on a particularly wide street or large square, there are other ways to create a sense of enclosure. Planners might use trees on the sides or in the median of a road, or awnings and banners. There are lots of examples of these kind of places that I travel through on a regular basis. Here on Apollolaan in Amsterdam, this street has an extremely wide right-of-way, but there's only one lane per car, and the line of trees breaks up the space into multiple places, making it feel more inviting. Trees that grow out enough to touch each other are called a kissing canopy, and this can be used to give a place a roof. These are some of the most cozy streets you'll find anywhere. They're actually lots of creative ways to create enclosure. At the market and Dolat Square in Zagreb, they use matching umbrellas as a sort of makeshift roof. And Rotterdam really took a whole enclosure thing literally when they built this enormous covered market. In part of that in suburbia, the wide open spaces don't contribute to a sense of enclosure, and you don't have a sense of where the place you're in begins or ends. Ultimately, it's hard to give an area a sense of enclosure when there needs to be ample free parking. This makes everywhere feel like one sea of mediocrity. As you travel through these areas, every place feels like every other place. What makes this crappy strip mall any different from this one thousands of kilometers away? They feel like the same place, which is to say, no place. At least this one in LA has palm trees, but it still sucks. This lack of place is why standing in a parking lot like this feels so depressing. Places with lots of surface parking lots totally lose their sense of enclosure and end up feeling lifeless and empty. Of course, the cars and asphalt everywhere don't help either. Compare this suburban shopping area in my hometown to this recently renovated downtown street in the same city.
That's nice.
And to be clear, this doesn't have to be a downtown versus suburbs thing. This street and this street are the same distance from their respective city centers, but one is designed primarily for people, while the other is designed primarily for cars. So one is an interesting and memorable place, while the other is a car sewer surrounded by a sea of asphalt. With a strong sense of place, you'll also have eye-level interest for what normies call stuff to look at. If the street is a public room, then this is what goes on the walls. There are shop windows, stalls, outdoor cafes, and public art. This is where little details can make a really big difference. When you're on foot, you really notice things like the mosaic facade on the Café Viard in Paris, or the intricate concrete details on the Diamant House in Prague. You're not going to notice this stuff when driving. Compare that kind of visual interest to a typical suburban facade. This looks like the walls of a prison. If you're unlucky enough to have to walk next to this, you'll get to look at cigarette butts and cheap aluminum siding. Most people don't want to live in a room that looks like this. So why would we want to be constantly surrounded by places that look like this? Another element of great places is entrance frequency, the number of other places you can access from a street. You want to be able to stop off at a variety of businesses at regular walkable intervals. The best example of this done wrong is suburban power centers like this one. The entrances to these places are so far apart that most people get back in their cars and drive to them. Entrance frequency is also really important for public squares and plazas. If you want to go to a place, you have to get to the place. Dolat Square, the one with the umbrellas, is a fully enclosed area, but there are multiple entrances. Those entrances connect to nearby streets and public transit options. But if this were built in suburbia, you need to completely surround this plaza with parking like at a shopping mall. All of a sudden, it's harder to get there unless you drive your car, and your sense of place is erased. What seems like a more attractive place to hang out, this or this? See, when a city considers a sense of place, it has to make choices about what the place means. What are the city's values? What are its unique attributes? And how does it serve the community? Defining a sense of place means defining your own identity. Are you a city that values dining and cafe culture? Or maybe you used to be an industrial city, but you're reshaping your identity with art. Are you a city that takes pains to preserve its history? Or is your city rapidly modern? How you design a place is how you design your identity. This place says nothing about identity except that they value cars more than they value people. One of the few examples of a strong sense of place in most US and Canadian cities are ethnic enclaves like Chinatown's Little Havana in Miami or Old Quebec City, which immigrants use to recreate the unique places of their home countries. And those places have been kept this way for tourism purposes because people want a sense of place. Since they're in North America, however, these places still see way too much space to car traffic, but they're generally better than other nearby areas. To recreate a sense of place from the towns they're based on, they have frequent entrances to specialty shops and restaurants, street-level details that are specific to that area, and a sense of enclosure that separates them from the world outside. The walls of the public room are decorated and interesting to look at, and you can't mistake them for any other place in the same city. But this is what it looks like when you're specifically designing with a sense of place in mind. Though even great places can start to lose their distinctiveness when they become the same as everywhere else. For example, it's hard to guess where you are if a place becomes filled with the same chain stores as every other place. Paris is famous for its unique streets and architecture and what planning experts call Frenchiness. I'm sure that's the technical term. But the Champs-Élysées is starting to become more generic as major brands move in, which risks turning this unique place into just another mall. This is why Amsterdam has been recently controlling the types of shops that can open in the city center. Sorry, Five Guys will need to open somewhere else. So of course, the 17th century canal ring of Amsterdam has a strong sense of place. There's nowhere quite like it, which is why it's flooded with tourists from all over the world and most locals avoid it. But it sure was nice during the coronavirus lockdowns. But really, almost every place I visit in Amsterdam has some sense of place. All of these places feel unique and different, and I've noticed a very remarkable difference in how I navigate here. In North America, I think about streets and roads. My mental map is based on major streets and cardinal directions. But in Amsterdam, I think about places. I'm in one place, and I think about all the places I need to pass through in order to get to another place. My mental map is full of the best routes from one place to another, and I think about the city as a series of unique places. This strong sense of place makes the city mean something. I actually care about these places, and I like being in them. There's a common response I get when showing video from car-dependent places. People say, this looks just like where I live, but they know it's not. Because when you design a place for cars, everything starts to look the same. This could be anywhere. After living somewhere like this, I'll never be able to go back to car dependency, because a place that could be any place is no place at all. I'd like to thank Ms. Corso, Nebula, and Patreon who pay me to travel from place to place, if you know.
So what are your thoughts? Any thoughts about that?
He hates Best Buy.
My channel is at nebula.tv/.
Any thoughts?
I mean, it helps when you live in a place that's hundreds and hundreds of years old, that's adapted to car use, rather than built for car use.
For cars.
Also,
Yeah.
it doesn't help that mass transit systems in the West Coast were systematically
Pushed off the
derailed
edge by
a lot.
cars. Yeah.
Sorry. It doesn't help that when those things are systematically sort of dismantled in the early 20th century. I mean, as always, yes, but apples and sort of hand grenades in terms of comparisons.
Yeah. No, I think it's good. I'm gonna, but
Yeah, please.
Well, thank you, Chair. I think that there's a lot to be said about what the message was behind this video around intentionality and really kind of thinking about beyond current technology and how we get around when we're designing new infrastructure. Especially in areas where you're going to have multimodal transportation just by the nature of what's there. So I think it poses some good questions for developing communities like ours that are growing, of what we want to look like and how to use our best assets in an intentional way to really think about that.
That's sort of why I wanted to show it. I don't know, I've been a planner for 15 years or something like that, and I think I always I abstracted vehicular trips are housing units, but no, we're talking about people, right? We're planning for people. Let's create great places for people, right? And let's create great places for people to be in, right? And it's like, oh, it's so simple when you put it in that way, like vehicular trips, right?
I would say in my mind, the trolley is like an amazing first step, right, into being able to do stuff like this. And most communities our size obviously do not have an asset like that. But it changes the nature of planning and whatever else when you actually have another mode of transportation to move people. But part of it, I mean, in a lot of ways, this is just a cultural problem. I mean, it's a cultural issue, yeah. It's not necessarily positive or negative, sort of. But we are not wired for density necessarily, for relying on mass transit solely, for even like walking that much, so.
The video didn't address the economies of those places and where people go for their jobs too. They're not all centered in those nice walkable, beautiful places where a lot of tourists are. That isn't where people are commuting to their jobs. You still have to build that into your infrastructure. How do you get people to their place of business?
Yeah, no, I think that's,
I just got a comment about making sure people are using their minds.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I think that's good. I think that's good too. I think when we it's, man, the Strong Towns video is actually really good for this too, because I mean, what the Strong Towns video essentially argues is like just using land wisely, right? And I think that when we spread out a city, like we're forced into like essentially one mode of operation. We're forced into the car and whatnot, and what the Strong Towns video actually argues is it talks about Eugene, and it says, hey, sort of incrementally as the city grew, they built this $420 million stormwater system, right? And it just sort of happened, right? Sort of just through growth, and they never quite thought about it. And the guy's argument is, what if they use that land more wisely? If they were half their footprint, then they would need half the size of a stormwater system. It would save them $210 million, right? You know, or it would have saved them over time. And so like, I think things like using land wisely and thinking about like, okay, how can people get to jobs? But I mean, even, I don't know, even things like parking requirements, and I mean, and I'm not saying do get rid of parking requirements, but I mean, stuff like that, we probably require more parking like in the Central Plaza area than we could ever feasibly use out there, you know? And is that using our land most wisely, you know? And it's just stuff like that. There's stuff like that where it's like, wait, are we using our land in the best way? And I don't know. I think your point about like getting people to jobs and whatnot is a good point too. One thing that I'll say, the thing that strikes me most about that video is his point about his mental map being places instead of roads. And it's like, whoa, that is such a cool point. And it's like, when we think of independence, like what are distinct places that we have? I would say we have basically one, right? Downtown, right? And the Riverfront Park and all that sort of stuff. I would just encourage us to think, and Inspiration Garden, let's say, Inspiration Garden. How could we then build a community of unique places, right? Wouldn't that be sweet if we could figure out how to crack that nut? I don't know. I think that'd be awesome. I think projects like that Central Talmadge project, that will be a sweet chance to explore some of those ideas. Like, how can we make that be a great place? You know?
I think to Alex's point, it definitely doesn't have things that we can one-to-one mimic but it definitely gives us a good mindset to follow moving forward of, you know, how do we make things more person-centric in our ideas moving forward, but can't really change how America is set up in a very car-centric way at this point, where mass transit is not generally accepted as a universal means of travel. Could it be changed over time? Possibly. But with what we have right now, there are still things that we could do that are more person-centric, that we're thinking more about the individual people who are going to be using these spaces than how are we going to get cars through those spaces. So I think it's a good modality of our mindset, more so than we need to have a one-to-one Amsterdam here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely.
And I would say, as someone who does a lot of walking in the community, it is really interesting to like look around and notice how people get around and how things are laid out when you're on foot versus when you're driving your vehicle. You definitely notice a lot of things that say, hey, does that make a lot of sense the way that this is laid out? So maybe it's just also on leaders to kind of take time to think about those things and really look and how people in all sorts of modes kind of experience those roads and those spaces.
It just reminds me too, when we were doing the transportation system plan, to thinking about downtown and like, oh, we need a roundabout at, you know, the three-way stop, and like to get cars more efficiently through. And it's just like, I remember we had a pretty negative reaction, but we were kind of oppositional to thinking about versus the consultants who were like, well, efficiency of cars is the North Star, rather than that the people-centric kind of piece. So yeah, I always love the videos, right? And I like that you push us. I know I'm always like, well, it doesn't work here, but nonetheless, I still think there's lots of lessons. I mean, of course, there's lots of lessons to be learned.
That's good.
Thanks, Fred.
I'm just gonna make a quick comment. It made me think of McMinnville, Fred. I think McMinnville their downtown, it has really utilized that, and it works well with cars and with people. I've watched that change over the last 20 years, and they're doing a good job.
And I love that it's hard to find parking, right? On the piece, right? You have to park 2 or 3 blocks away, or every time I go and meet on somebody on 3rd Street, you kind of circle the block or whatever. And of course, as you probably all know, right, I love that problem. That's a great problem, because that means it's being used. And so I do appreciate that. I mean, every time we have a parking discussion for downtown, of course, so.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's fundamentally it, though. We're trying to create great places.
Yeah.
Right?
I really do like also too the way the enclosure piece and the rooms piece, and I think that's the part where, I mean, creating, I don't know what the tools look like or the levers that you help incent people to do stuff like that, but that is absolutely, the charm of any historic downtown that's 2 or 3 stories tall and kind of closed in. Or it's the difference between driving through a neighborhood that's sort of brand new, that the trees haven't grown up yet, and done the canopy. It's like where this feels kind of naked, versus, this is an established 100-year-old big trees, oak trees and whatever else. And that's of course the sort of almost intangible flavor.
Right. And I mean, so just pointing at the downtown study, like the downtown parking study, we are talking a lot about stuff like that, just encouraging them to think about how can we integrate parking into downtown without like selling out downtown for parking, right? Like, can that be done? Like, can you design parking in the downtown in such a way to still create great places, but to give people places to park and whatnot? So we're thinking about things like cut-throughs, right? And using things like cut-throughs along blocks just to create some of those really unique places. So anyways, I don't know. Some of that stuff is gonna be part of that project.
Fred, I'm just curious, we're talking about the trolley. Do we have updated current ridership numbers?
32,000 in the first 3 months is the statistic that I saw.
Yeah.
And I think that was published, I guess
We're getting
published now.
consistently like 10,000 people a month.
The only reason I ask is because Representative Tom Anderson recently had his legislative proposal vetoed for a study to bring back streetcar service to Salem. And I told him, well, you can look at the numbers are increasing for the shuttle service, or the trolley service. And so hopefully he'll get those numbers, that data, to strengthen his argument during the even year session next year.
The only other thing I wanted to say, thank you, is that I do wonder, and maybe I'm just reading into it, but the lack of input for this survey, an answer in and of itself, right? Is it not a problem as identified if people are just like, yeah, I mean, my experience is.
Yeah,
is
I
what it is.
mean, that's sort of where I'm getting to with the whole idea of like, hey, it's their prerogative not to participate. And we've talked to a lot of people who have been like, man, not that big an issue.
You all know my bias, I'm sorry.
What's that?
You all know my bias, I'm sorry.
It's an interesting conversation. It's
Well,
a good conversation.
Fred, coming from Salem, let me tell you, when people are fired up about issues like another bridge, they'll find you and tell you.
Right.
So the fact that people aren't like knocking down the doors to tell you that parking's a problem says something in itself. Because from my experience, people let you know if it's a real problem.
Right. So the last thing I'll mention is I was at the library and I found a new release book. Look at that. Paved Paradise, How Parking Explains the World. At the library. And so it's got a Donald Shoup recommendation on the back, a Richard Florida recommendation on the back. I have read a couple of chapters. It talks, there's a great conversation about curbside management. And like, I mean, one of the points that they make in there is, you can create parking spots, like I'll point at the library parking lot or the cinema parking lot, but still people want to park right on Main Street because it's the best parking spot, right? And so one of the points that they make is a lot of times people will make garages in inconvenient locations and then charge more for the garages in the inconvenient locations than the parking on the street. And then they wonder, why are people still trying to park on the street? We've got this garage over there, but it makes complete sense, doesn't it? I mean, you ever had that experience before? I know I have, and I thought, that's why people park at Main and C, right? That's why people don't park at the cinema. They're making a completely reasonable decision. Those are the better spots. They're closer to where they want to go, right? Yeah, makes good sense. Yeah, sometimes you just got to read it and be like, yes, that makes sense.
Thank you, Fred.
Right? Yeah. All right.
If that's all we got, I'd entertain a motion for adjournment.
I motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Is anybody opposed? Okay, we're adjourned, thank you.